The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things. Of shoes, of shifts, of sewing wax, of selvages, and queens. Off with your head! Hey y'all, I'm Jackie and I'm so excited to have you here today because guess what? My Angelica gown is finished. As some of you already know, a couple of weeks ago I attended the Fête Historique 18th Century Ball in St. Louis. The ball was fantastic and I met so many amazing people that night. And now I'm so psyched to share the making of my ball gown with you for the Angelica-thon. I've got a ton to share with you today. So let's brew up a special cup of tea and get started. Here at Fantastical Follies, we learn from our mistakes. Did I mark a T at the top of the side back piece in permanent marker so I would know which way was the top, so I didn't put it on upside down like I did last time? You bet I did. I'm pretty happy with this first try on. There's a little bit of wonkiness happening here. I did have to tuck back the center front a little bit. I think I'm happy enough with this that we can go ahead and do the scariest, most terrifying, nerve-wracking part of this entire project, cutting out my hella expensive silk jacquard. This is the face of extreme confidence. I can't tell if this is one-way fabric or not, so I've decided to play it safe and assume so. This is going to take longer, but I don't have any wiggle room with this fabric, so I carefully measured the first side and cut it out. Then I place it face down on the fabric for the second side. Not gonna lie, this is really nerve-wracking. If I screw this up, it's done and over. This is the wrong side, this is the right side, this is the center back. Let's go. I sure hope that was right. Here's my optimized layout for potentially directional fabric. And so I don't repeat the disastrous cutting mistake of my first gown, I marked no on both sides of the skirt panel. Highly recommend. Alright, here's how you properly assemble the bodice back. This is bodice view A. Fold in the seam allowance in the center back and iron. Then sew your boning channel on both pieces. Then iron in your seam allowances on the other side. Iron in the seam allowances on your fashion fabric as well. Place them right sides together and pin. Now sandwich your pieces together so that the meat, aka the fashion fabric, is on the inside of the sandwich and the bread, aka the lining, is on the outside. Then sew it with the sandwich stitch. I have a full tutorial on this linked in the description below. I found that this stitch is much easier if you make the bread just a little wider than the meat, and you take the time to hand baste it down, especially if you're working with silk or other slippery fabrics. We're going to attach the side back pieces the same way. Once that's basted, sandwich these pieces onto your sewn center back. Ta-da! All right, I think we're good. I've got a little bit of a gap in the center, which will give me a little bit of flexibility if my weight fluctuates. Straps are comfortable. I think the back looks okay. I am getting a little bit of wrinkling, but I think I can just give it a little hit with the iron. It should be okay. So I think we're good to start laying in the side back pieces, or I guess I should say the side pieces, because yeah. Pin the side to the side back. We're going to machine sew this seam since it takes a lot of strain and won't be visible, but you could backstitch if you prefer. This is the correct way to sew, right side to wrong side, so the seam allowance is on the front. And now is also a good time to add your backboning if you have not done so already. Now lay your fashion fabric right side up on your bodice piece. I like to pin the side edges even, and then roll under the excess seam allowance on the side back seam. I regret using white thread for this. Make sure your folded edge laps well over the top of the stitching line. I gotta be honest with y'all, this is hands down my least favorite part of this kind of process. Why, you may ask? Because you have to put the entire kit on just to do a little fitting. Not to mention that it's still really hot here. I mean, the weather has broken. It's
We have been seeing like sub 100 temperatures now for a week, which is great, but it's still like in the upper to mid 90s. So it's hot, and it's hot in my apartment. And by the time I get all of this crap on, I'm sweating. And you know what happens when I start to sweat and I get overheated? I get frustrated real fast.
Anyway, I'm gonna do spin for you. I'm still getting a little bit of wrinkling in the side back. It's a wrinkling I can live with. I'm gonna wrangle out of this and let's move on. Once that's fit, go ahead and prick stitch the side back seam. Sew the bodice front lining to the rest of the bodice at the side seam and then remove your basting stitches. Iron the seam allowances toward the center, mark your seam allowance on the side and iron it to the inside. Then place it right side up onto the bodice and pin the side seam as you did the side back seam. Then carefully smooth all the fabric out, pinning and matching the edges. That, my friends, is why we do a full wearable mock-up. Let's get her stitched. All right, we're starting to finally get somewhere. Front bodice is sewn at the sides. This is wrinkly. It's always going to be wrinkly. I doubled my thread when I sewed the prick stitch on the back pieces, and that was a mistake. Highly recommend you only use a single piece of thread for that instead of doubled. So I've got the neckline pinned here. I've got the straps pinned where I want them to be. This is the hardest thing for me. And then I've got all of my front pinned tight. I did this on my body. You can baste everything, and I did that for my first Angelica gown and it was not successful. So I thought I would do it on my body this time, and it definitely was much easier. So this is best done in the mirror, and you want to make sure when you're pinning this flat that you're not bending over to look like this, because that will affect the fit of your fabric. You want to stand straight up. I'm going to stick my thumb inside the bodice here. Notice I'm not in my stays or anything, I'm just in the bodice lining. You want to kind of smooth it and stretch it, work from the top to the bottom, and make sure everything is perfectly tight. And then you'll take your pin and pin into the fashion fabric and the lining. Okay, like that. We are actually going to tack this fabric down to the lining about 5/8 of an inch away from the outside of the eyelets using a prick stitch. And once that's done, then we can start finishing all of the rogue edges, mainly the front here, the back in the same spot, the center back, and the bottom edges. Let's get going. Here's the prick stitching on the center front. I've given myself a little extra fabric in case I ever need to let this out. Turn in the raw edges on the neckline, but be sure to leave the front edge free of the lining. Let's deal with the pesky shoulder strap. Fold the side seam allowances to the outside of the strap. I know it's weird, stick with me. Roll up the seam allowances on the bottom of the bodice. Roll in and iron the lining pieces to match, then pin. Notice we're only doing the front of the bodice. Don't worry about the back part yet. Roll in the center backs the same way. Take the strap and put it wrong side together with the bodice and pin, and then sew. Open up your bodice and measure between the marks from the pattern. This is the width that you want to pleat your skirts to. Mark your center and the full width of the skirt. Then pin your skirt at the center back seam and the front. That's a lot of fabric we gotta pleat down, folks. Start with a 4-inch inverted box pleat in the center. Pleat by eye toward the center back pleat. You really need to make these deep in the back, deeper than you think. Make them small and as even as possible. It's helpful to do this on an ironing board so you can fold down the length of the pleat neatly. Do take the time to neaten each pleat before doing the next one. This takes ages. Dancing makes the time go by a little faster. Once you get close to the front, make the pleats less deep. You want the bulk of the fabric to be concentrated in the back to give you floof. There's the completed pleats. Took ages, but gosh, it looks good. Iron those babies down and take your time. Mark the fold line on the skirt back. I skipped this the first time. Learn from my mistakes. It helps a lot with placement. This is the focal point of your gown, so you really want to make the extra effort here. Pin them babies and pin them good. Face down your pleats, but leave your pins in for the next bit. Glass-headed pins do really well for this process. Make sure your skirt stopping point is marked. Now place the center back edge at the bottom point of your fold line, trying not to let everything fall off the ironing board. Place the rest of the bodice out on the skirt, meeting the fold line up until it touches the seam allowance. From there, just overlap the bodice over the seam allowance. Then pin her down. Sew the bodice to the skirt in the manner of your choosing. I used a small, tiny tunnel stitch sewn from the outside. Then get out your trusty old iron and iron down those folds. You could try it on and fix the hem before you sew, but this has a train, so I'm just trusting the sewing gods here. Now is also a good time to stitch on the front strap. Time for everyone's favorite part. Mark your seam allowances and iron up. Do the same for the lining. Now is the time to sew your dart on the fashion fabric and run 2 sets of gathering stitches on the lining in the same spot. Place sleeves wrong sides together and pin the lining to the edge of the fashion fabric. Then gather the lining to fit. So we're doing the traditional sleeve method here that's mentioned in the instructions. This is the infamous turny-outy right side innie method that a lot of folks get confused about, so hopefully this will help make it a little less confusing. I wasn't so sure about it at the time. 1. Take your lining and fold it right sides together. Pin at the cuff and set aside. 2. Take your fashion fabric and fold it in half right sides together. Pin at the cuff. 3. Take the halved fashion fabric and place it on top of the halved lining. It's weird, trust me. You now have 4 layers of fabric, the fashion fabric on top and the lining below. 4. Pin through all 4 layers along the seam. 5. Stitch which. Now, turn the fashion fabric right side out. Then go up from the wrist and pull the lining down to fit. You now have an assembled sleeve. Holy guacamole, it worked! Mark your rights and lefts to make your life easier. That point is going to go right there. Line the point up with the sleeve right sides together and pin. Now continue to pin all the way around the pit and up to the front and baste it together. Now we're gonna cheat. Here's my wearable mock-up complete with fitted sleeve. We're going to measure from the top of the first pleat down to the seam. Then we'll measure the width of the completed pleats. Now we'll take the very same measurements, because this is the very same pattern, and mark them on our new bodice. Pin the sleeve up to the mark, leaving the seam allowances living on top of the strap to reduce underarm bulk. Then pleat to the markings. Looking pretty good. They're ready to be stitched in by hand. Now we can lay in the shoulder strap. We've got all the seam allowances folded inward. Pin it to the back and then pin it to the lining strap all the way around. Then all you've got to do is sew it down. Final thing before we start the cosplay is adding the ties. The upper ties are going to go on the inside by the side seam. I find that I like mine about an inch away from the seam. You can play around with the positioning of this. Then you'll want to place the corresponding tapes at the bottom of your skirt. Mine are 27 inches away from the front of the skirt and 13 inches up from the hem. But remember, that's going to vary depending on your height, your preferences, the shape and size of your false rump. So make sure that you are testing this out, experimenting, and just pinning things on to get the shape that you like that works for your shape. I also decided to add a hook and eye in the center back of the skirt and bodice point to pull up the train. All right, let's take Angelica and make her a queen. The over-petticoat is one of the two main focal points of the cosplay. It's made from strips of black poly shantung that I hemmed and attached to a ruffle. In the front, there's a hand-embroidered center panel with hearts that I then decided to bedazzle because sparkles. Then I hand-dyed some silk habitai I got from Dharma Trading to do the poufs. I made one continuous strip that was about twice the width of my petticoat. I cut them 4 1/4 inches wide and then hemmed with my machine to make silk ribbon 4 inches wide. I then ran basting stitches every 4 inches along the length. In retrospect, hand basting would have taken less time because the lines were so short I had to knot each end before pulling, and it was a nightmare. Then I placed them along the seam between the ruffle and the strips and tacked them all down by hand. So while I tread along on all of these poufs, my life has been a whirlwind this past month, and I thought some of you may be interested, and if you're not, that's okay. Just skip to the next chapter and you won't miss any sewing content. It's really helpful to us content creators if you do just skip the chapter that you're not interested in instead of navigating off of the video. We can go in, and if we are seeing a lot of people skipping a particular chapter, then we know that that is not interesting to you, and we don't have to include that bit next time we do a video. How are you doing? There is a lot going on right now, and it's kind of scary. I hope you're okay. You know, there's no shame in not being okay right now, and there's no shame in talking to people about it. Some of you may already know this, but I quit my job of 11 years last month, and I started a new career. It has been a long time coming. I've known for about a year now that I was leaving my previous employment. It was a really toxic work situation that was severely affecting my mental health and my physical health as well. I struggled for a really long time trying to find another job in my field, which is writing. The problem is with writing is that everybody wants, you know, 2 years of experience working in this field, but you can't get the experience because you can't get a job because they want experience. So hit the like button if you've ever had to deal with that nonsense before. In any case, this job kind of fell in my lap. It's a positive work environment. It is also only about 30 hours a week, which means I'm going to have a lot more time to focus on editing these videos and making them better for you. However, there is a caveat to only working 30 hours a week instead of, 40 to 70. And that is, I now have 0 expendable income for costumes. If you have the means, I would ask if you could please consider buying me a coffee. I appreciate it so much. If you can't, that is totally fine and understandable. Just by watching this video, you're helping, and I love you for it. I will also say, if you don't have the means to donate on my Ko-fi, you can still check out my Ko-fi page. There is a lot of free content up there. It's important to me that I don't hide everything behind a paywall. So anyway, I am really, really excited about this venture, and it has been kind of crazy and draining just leaving my old job in the middle of busy season, and then onboarding and trying to get ready for this ball that I'm going to next week. If y'all have any news to share or have anything that you're excited about, any events that you're excited about, I would love for you to pop down into the comments and let me know. I think this chat is getting a little long, so I'm gonna
Continue with these damn puffs.
Then I topped it all off with some handmade 4-loop bows with little jewels that were also handmade on top to tie it all together. Okay, so now I'm working on the poof that's going to go on top of my crazy hair. I'm using the American Duchess guide for this, but the instructions are sometimes confusing in this book, so I'm going to show you how I'm doing it. This is the base of the poof. It's just like a teardrop shape, and it has one layer of buckram in the middle, just regular millinery buckram, and then it has a layer of cotton on the underside, which was just, you know, running stitched. And then on the top, I have silk taffeta, aka this polyester shantung I'm using for the rest of my costume. This is going to be the poofy part of the poof, which is going to go on top of the right side of this. And so basically what we're gonna do is we are going to place this with right side to wrong side. And then we're gonna start pinning and pleating to the underside like this. I'm gonna pin the 4 corners-ish first, so we have something to anchor to, because this chiffon, the silk chiffon, is squidgy AF. From there, all you need to do is pleat, 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 and pin, pin, pin before sewing it down to the backside. I then placed the guillotine, which is the centerpiece of my outfit, onto the poof. We made this in another video. It's linked in the description below. I marked the spots with pins on the poof itself. I sewed it to the poof and also sewed 2 barrettes for extra stability. Then I pinned the organza to make it poofy in a way that seemed pleasing. I sewed that down and then added the poofy poof edge. Then it was just a matter of decorating with roses, half painted red. A pearly dingle dongle I found in my craft closet. Some red silk ribbon. And a pink flamingo ACL pin, because I didn't have time to make the flamingo cane I wanted to. And with that, the ensemble was completed.